Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Stephanie Alexander with Boost LLC. You guys are now on our webcast for tips for keeping and engaging essential employees in a crisis. And I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Nichole and Lindsay. Nichole, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for joining us, everyone. My name is Nichole Atallah. I am a partner at the law firm PilieroMazza. We're located in Washington, D.C. I am a partner in our labor and employment practice group. So as you can imagine, we have been very actively engaged with our clients regarding this issue and happy to answer any questions you all might have.
Great, thank you. Lindsay, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Moore. I'm a senior HR consultant with Boost, and my background is in government contracting, but I also work with a wide variety of other types of clients as well. So definitely here to help you, navigate through these challenging times.
Great, thank you. And finally, as I said, I'm Stephanie Alexander. I'm the CEO and founder of Boost LLC. We work primarily with growing federal contractors in the areas of back office support, including accounting, contracts, HR, recruiting, and strategic pricing. My perspective for today's purposes is from a small business owner. I am a small business owner myself and have a lot of the same concerns and thoughts that probably many of you do as well. So we're going to jump into it. I've got a couple of quick questions. I'm going to be moderating this, so hopefully we won't jump all over each other. But most importantly, we wanted to make this as open as possible. Now is the time. So if you have questions, if there's anything that you're kind of like what best practices, this is meant to be interactive. It's as interactive as you can be in your yoga pants sitting on a webinar at home. Let me first promise you that none of us, this is us with hair and makeup. This is not the current state at all. And hopefully everyone has put their dog away and done all the things. And, this is the new norm. So as we get started, I want to kick it over to Nichole first. Nichole, one of the first questions that I have is, as an employer, can I require employees to come to work? How does this work? What do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So it can be a little bit of a complicated question, of course, because lawyers don't really like to answer questions, let's be honest. But in light of all
you say it depends. How many times are you going to say it depends?
Right? Well, it's a factual, so one of the main considerations is, are employees essential pursuant to the terms of any sort of local stay-at-home order, and they're all different. All right, so I get calls all the time. Can I make this employee come to work? Can I make that employee come to work? And it really does depend on the order that might be in place in the locality where the employee is working. And if you're in the DC, Virginia metro area, they all are aligning now, but at one point in time, we had different orders coming out of different places, and an employee works in this state but lives in this state, and how are they going to get back and forth? But once you've made that initial determination as to whether an employee can be deemed essential and is not subject to an order, or is otherwise not subject to an order, yes, you can make somebody come into work. And of course, that's not to say you shouldn't be compassionate. There are a lot of employees that are, I think, genuinely scared about coming to the work site, but generally, you have to run your business as well, and Stephanie can speak to maybe how she's been communicating this to employees. But the short answer is yes, you can make people come in.
You can require. So, Lindsay, from your perspective, more so from the employee, what have you seen in terms of businesses and how they've effectively or maybe not effectively communicated, yes, this messaging in terms of yes, you have to come in?
Yeah, I think that it's a good first step for the employer to respond to that worker's fears and really listen to them and have a conversation with what's going on. Are their specific concerns reasonable? I think, right off the bat, we always think that we're going to have an easy answer, just like Nichole and Stephanie said. We don't always have an easy answer, but finding out from each employee as to what their concerns are and if they're valid, you may be able to address whether or not you've, addressed their concerns already. If they have some concerns about the workplace or the things that you've done to keep them safe, you can then use that time to, you know, share that with them, what you have done to make the workplace more safe for them. So I really think that, you know, having that conversation first and figuring that out is an important first step.
So I think it's key here to, this is the assumption that all of your not essential employees are all telecommuting, working from home. Those people are taken care of, as we kind of just really want to focus on this one on your essential employees. So this could be Nichole or Lindsay, either one of you, can you give us a quick just gut check on some examples of essential employees, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page and we're covering the same ground?
Yeah, sure. This is Nichole. So essential employees, almost all orders have exceptions for national security positions, a lot of positions that are at federal government contracting sites, not all positions, but in order to efficiently run and continue some of the federal landscape, particularly at the DoD and some other agencies. When you get outside of government contracting, it's generally food services, grocery store workers, landscaping, and there are a number of other types of positions. But again, you want to look at that local order that determines, you know, what that locality is deemed essential, because that will give you some guidance. There's also exceptions generally for one person to come into the office occasionally to keep it flowing, so to speak. For those particular positions, we've recommended employers provide letters for any position really to employees, so that if they are stopped or questioned, they have something showing that their employer has deemed them essential.
Okay, so that's a good point before we move into, you know, what to do once they're there. But should the actual employer provide some sort of letter to each of these people who are deemed essential, so that they have it maybe in their cars or something, just in case they're stopped during a shelter-in-place order?
That's what we have recommended, yes. It gives them, even if they never use it, it gives employees peace of mind. I think that they won't be stopped. And it's helpful for that letter to cite the authority and the order for that employee to be moving. Lindsay, I don't know if you have anything to add from your perspective.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say too, Nichole.
Okay, so best practice, let's make sure that we've got at least some sort of documentation. And then, okay, so they show up to work. What is our responsibility as an employer for, especially if they're either in our specific store per se, like we own the store, or if they're sitting on government site? And these are a lot of people in the Intel community. And so there's two different versions of this, things that we can control and things that we can't. What is our obligation as an employer in terms of providing the safest type of environment possible for our employees? And what I mean by that is, PPP, like what are we obligated to do?
From a legal perspective, you want to be checking the OSHA website. It has a really great resource for what level of risk that your workplace might be. So for example, if people are of limited contact with the public, that would probably be folks in the Intel community, those kinds of folks. They're a level 1, and really you're just telling people to wash their hands and communicating with your customers if you don't have control over the work site, communicating with the customer regarding how the workplace is being cleaned, whether we can thin out the workforce and alternate shifts, what can we be doing there? But generally it's a wash your hands kind of situation. For employers that are facing the public more frequently, or are subject to a specific order. For example, here in DC, the mayor just issued an order mandating that certain workers have different types of PPE, like grocery store workers. So in addition to the OSHA requirements, you could have local orders requiring additional safety measures. You want to be looking at those as well. But the more your workforce is interfacing generally with the public, the more requirements or suggestions there are to maintain a safe workplace. And you do have that obligation to maintain a safe workplace. Obviously, this is challenging to do. Lindsay?
Yeah, I also have found just so many good resources through OSHA, keeping us in check with, what's the specific industry that you're in, what state are you operating in. There's a list of things that you may be able to do as far as, social distancing throughout the workplace, staggering shifts, cleaning and disinfecting all areas that you can. So I think that in order to get a good peace of mind, visiting the OSHA site would give you some more guidance as to, what you're specifically required to do as an employer in your specific industry and in your specific location.
What if you don't have control over the site? For instance, those that are on government site.
I would say in that situation, I'm hoping that you're talking with your, contracting officer and whoever is specifically on the site. I would also say that just, again, addressing the employees' concerns of what is actually going on in that site and what is it that you need, or, what can we do to help you feel better, to see if there are things that you may be able to do. Perhaps you can provide them with masks, not necessarily the N95 ones, but, people giving them masks or setting up stations, or providing them with hand sanitizer. There may be some different things that you can do just depending upon what that specific situation is for those employees.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize enough, Nichole, how important it is to be talking to any, whether you're in government contracting or you are just in a subcontractor situation on a construction site and you don't have control over the site itself. There's what you can do, and then there's what, the customer can, or your prime can help you facilitate. Generally, I've seen folks working together, but there have been instances of failures to return calls or return communications about what exactly is going to be done. And frankly, I think it's because everybody feels a little bit helpless to do exactly what they would love to do in a perfect situation where all supplies were available all the time. And I think communicating to people, what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to do is very important, because then they don't think you're just ignoring them. I have one client, for example, whose office staff is, making masks at night for their workforce. So it's certainly an extraordinary time, supply-wise.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to go down two separate paths here. The first is with regards to what if our employees or someone at the site actually has COVID, and like what the ramifications with that, what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. And then the second path that I want to circle back on is with regards to pay and actual benefits and sick leave and unemployment, and what to do for essential employees in terms of their kids are, where all the rest of it. So let's go with the employee side first. If you have an employee, first off, do they have to tell you if they have symptoms? Do they have, walk us through that in terms of the full life cycle of, hey, I suspect someone might be sick. What's their obligation to tell me? Can I tell them to go home? What is that? Nichole, you want to start with that, and Lindsay?
Sure. Yeah, so first of all, it's really important that if you don't already have an infectious disease policy, that you consider drafting one. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but it can be, we expect you not to report to work and to tell us immediately if you exhibit any symptoms of COVID. And, and then at that point in time, and tell them you now have an affirmative obligation. Therefore, it's a policy violation if they fail to report to you. You can ask people to go home if they are exhibiting symptoms. They say, oh, it's just my allergies. It's a terrible time of year. Happens to me every year. Okay, go get a doctor's note that says that you've been cleared to come to work, and you're sure it's not, and they're pretty darn sure that it's not COVID, or sure it's not COVID. It's just not worth infecting the rest of your workforce. The EEOC has gone as far as to say that you can take temperatures of folks coming on your work site which I was surprised to see, but this is again an extraordinary time, and that came out a few weeks ago. So there are a number of employers, I think even Amazon at this point too, I believe, I could be wrong about that, but a number of large businesses that are checking employee temperatures when they come on site. So you do have an expanded ability to monitor the health and safety of your workforce.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I was going to say, if someone does test positive for COVID, there's a few things that you should be doing. Obviously, you want to isolate and immediately send that person home if they are still, working. You also want to find out from that employee who they've been in contact with for the last 14 days and, the areas that the employee has been on the work site for the last 14 days, if they can, recall that information. You would want to contact the employees who the affected employee was in contact with. You would want to let them know. However, you are not to disclose the affected employee's name. I know that it may be obvious for some people to figure out, but you aren't supposed to disclose that information to the other people that have been around that person. So you would also want to contact the Department of Health and also the CDC, letting them know that you've had someone, on site that's tested positive. You may want to contact your workers' comp carrier and record this information for OSHA purposes. Again, it depends. That depends if that person was actually, at work at the time, and then other people are also then testing positive after that. Then there may be some workers' comp that comes into play there. You want to make sure that you let your staff know that someone has tested positive and that you're taking all the required steps by the Department of Health to, clean the areas and do all the things that you're required to do according to the Department of Health when someone tests positive. And then just remember to keep all of the documentation for that employee's information in their separate medical file, not with the rest of their personal information in their HR files.
So question, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, I get a lot of questions about the privacy issue that you mentioned first. Like, what do you mean I can't say their name? Or isn't it important that they know that they interacted with Bob 2 days ago, because they're going to remember better than Bob will probably, whether they shook hands, whether they hugged, what they did, So the way I like to think of it is it's because it's an ADA issue and a medical information issue and privacy laws issue. And you want to be thinking about the reason you need to let people know that somebody may have or does have COVID, and how wide that circle needs to be, and how much you can limit that information in order to achieve your goal. So if your goal is to protect other employees, how can you do that with the least amount of information about that particular person as possible? And that's really what you should be asking yourself, and you should be documenting. Because sometimes I think we assume that we need to disclose a lot of information, and then we think about the purpose, we think about what we really need to do to keep people safe, and it doesn't include all the details, right? It's much more limited than we think initially.
Mm-hmm.
So what if so we've got someone on site, they have the big assumption, but they've been tested and have come back positive. And I think we can talk in just a second about testing, knowing that it's not as widely available as probably any of us wants. Do I need to shut down the entire site, knowing that what you just said of privacy and not wanting, poor Bob in this case, but Bob has COVID. I mean, so what do we do then? I mean, is it an all hands on deck, everybody out? Is it how do we handle that moment?
This is Lindsay. I don't think that you need to shut down your entire site. I think that that would be up to the employer to decide. It depends on how big you are, where you're located, if you even have, the ability to do that. Some smaller businesses, that have a very small workspace may decide to do something like that. But really, if you have control over the situation of the building, you are required to do a deep clean and sanitize all the areas that that person was in, but you aren't required to shut down the site at that point.
And if you're cleaning, the CDC has a good kind of primer on what it means to clean the site if you have control over your site, or at least the ability to clean the workstations at your site. Again, you're also going to want to look at the character of the work site, right? Some work sites are going to be very easy to control, and shut down may not mean I have to shut down because the work site's contaminated. You might have to shut down because there has been so much interaction between your workforce that for a period of 5, 6, 7 days, you don't think that it's feasible or safe to continue to let people commingle. That's what's happening in some of the meat plants across the country right now. So again, you want to evaluate, is this a situation where people were sitting at desks, were probably somewhat social distanced, and I can just have the work site clean and everybody can come back? Or do I have concerns that some other people might be infected? And if I continue to have them come to work, then I'm really going to be in a difficult situation. And that's a judgment call that I think is a little bit harder to make sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've got a nuanced question for you, and we are getting your questions, so please keep them coming, and I will make sure that we address all of them, or as many as we can get in. But a question for you is, what if we are sitting, again, back to not in complete control of our destiny? We either report through a prime, or we report to the government client themselves or customer themselves. What is our obligation as the employer to tell the prime or to tell the government that we have a sick employee? Like what's the protocol there? And who gets to make that call in terms of how, directing that person go home? Is that the responsibility of the government? Is that the responsibility of the prime? Is it the responsibility of the employer? Knowing that maybe all three may not be at the same work site, or in direct discussions with the infected employee or the potentially sick employee.
This is Lindsay. I think that you should be very transparent and tell the government, if you're a government contractor, tell the prime, if you're not the prime, that you have an employee that has tested positive. Again, you're not going to be providing them with the employee's name, but I think at this time, with everything that's going on, the more transparent we can be about doing the right thing, the better it is for us. And it is our responsibility as the employer of that employee to send that person home. So you as the employer would have that responsibility.
Yeah, to add to that, I tend to agree. And a lot of primes and customers out there have actually issued guidance as far as their expectations for what you have to report. It may, if you feel like you don't have that direction, it might be a good idea to raise the question, because what's been happening a lot is that no one's gotten to that point, and then something pops up and everybody seems to be scrambling for a protocol going forward, right? What do we do? It doesn't have to be set in stone, but a good idea of what your obligation is or what they would expect of you, so you don't get on the wrong side of them when they hear through the grapevine that you've had a case or two, and they're going to think that you're trying to keep it under wraps and not be transparent, which is not going to be a good thing on the back end, right? So I have had a number of clients come in to get into issues as far as the client wants more information, for example, the name, the location, than they want to provide or think that is appropriate for them to provide. So you might run into situations like that you have to manage delicately.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's go more down the path of kind of payment and what that looks like and what our obligations are. Paid leave from, you know, where all of this goes. And I mean, there's so many different aspects to this. I know one of our questions is with regards to the government approving extra pay for essential employees working on government sites and whether or not contractors are required to do the same. So I'll let either of you jump in here, but all things as it comes to, you know, the paid leave, furloughed, all the stuff.
As
So-
far as, oh,
Yeah,
so,
go ahead, Lindsay.
okay, I was just going to say, as far as that question about, you know, paying the essential employees extra pay or hazardous pay, if you aren't required to do that, it's absolutely a great thing to do if you can, and a nice thing to do. You're not required to do that. If you are able to get reimbursed for that, if you're, you know, billing that out, then I think that, you know, that's great and that's what you should do. But you know, you aren't required to change their pay during this time or to increase it.
We'll have to see what, if Congress authorizes money for essential workers, or then really what we're doing is looking at the legislation to see if that somehow flows to contractors. I doubt there will be an obligation to do that unless the government is authorized to allow you to bill for it.
Okay, so the answer for one of the questions is, like I said, if and when the government approves extra pay for essential employees, are contractors required to do the same? And the answer is, it depends on if it's in the contract and authorized, and then also TBD waiting on Congress. Is that about right? Just want to make sure this person gets the direct answer. As direct as we can make it without the lawyer talk that says it depends, as best we can. All right, so talk to me about sick leave. Talk to me about, okay, we've got somebody who, you know, is just not feeling well. Who knows what it is? It could be allergies. I mean, good grief. You know, right now is the worst time of the year in the DC metro region. I can tell you that personally, from an allergy perspective. But so what do we do with sick leave? What if they don't have leave? What if we, you know, walk us down that path?
Yeah, so the sick leave, there are kind of two ways to think about sick leave. And the first question I think you should be asking yourself is, can the employee otherwise work? So if they're essential and you haven't had to shut down the site for any reason, and so there's work available for them to do, then they would qualify under the federal emergency sick leave law that was passed that provides 80 hours of sick leave for themselves or care of another. And then if they have kids at home, which seems to be a lot of people right now, then they might qualify for an additional 10 weeks of leave on top of that 2 weeks. So an additional 10 weeks of leave, assuming they have Family and Medical Leave Act available. Now that only applies to companies with less than 500 employees. So if there are over 500 employees, they don't have to provide it. And so that's the circumstance when that leave is available. If, say, somebody got COVID and you ended up shutting down the site for 14 days, or there's a quarantine order that shuts down your site for some reason, or the Department of Health shuts down your site for some reason, then they would not qualify for that leave, and they might have to use some other bucket of leave that you have for them, go unpaid or be furloughed.
So as the employer, how do we get reimbursed for that? Or do we get reimbursed for that? How does that work when they use this paid leave?
Yep, so you will be reimbursed for that. You should be, first I want to say you should be keeping good documentation of the employees that are actually using this FCRA leave. So, you know, I've advised some of my clients to set up separate charge codes and things like that so that they track it correctly. And you want a request from the employee to include their name and the date and some sort of statement about the COVID-related reason as to why they're requesting this and why they're unable to work or telework. Keeping that documentation will be important for reimbursement purposes, so that's why I'm mentioning that. So you can, there's two ways of doing this. You can hold back on the federal tax payments that you're making out of your payroll directly for these employees. So you can withhold them and only submit, if you need a certain amount of money to pay for this leave, you would only need to submit the difference of the money that you weren't using. And I don't know if that's totally making sense, but basically you can hold your federal tax payments to and you don't need to submit them right away. And then if you end up paying this leave in addition to the federal tax payments that you're making, if it's greater than the federal tax payment that you would normally make, then you can request a reimbursement through the IRS. There's a form, it's called the Form 7200, which is new, and you would be completing that form to get this reimbursement. So definitely, I think it's important to talk with your payroll provider to talk to them about, holding back on the federal tax payments.
Yeah,
So
and the 7,200 you can also use. So you would normally do all of your federal stuff on that, and I'm not a tax attorney, so forgive me, but you're normally doing a 941 that reconciles all of your Social Security payments, and that's where a lot of this would be done. And so if you also you don't want to have to wait to do your 941 on a quarterly basis because you need that money sooner. You can use the 7,200 to get that money sooner.
So what I also heard is good practice is to set up a separate charge number for those people who are doing timesheets or in whatever way that your company is reimbursed for time to make sure that you're tracking this very specifically.
Yes.
It's going to, and it's because it's going to be very difficult for employers to go back and figure out if you're just using your normal leave system, what of it is FCRA leave and what of it is not. So in an audit situation or where you're going out to try to get the tax, if you don't have a separate way of tracking that particular leave, your math is going to get exhausting. And in some cases, I have clients setting up more than one charge code so they can track the two different types of paid leave under FCRA. So there is a cap of $511 a day at full pay for an employee's own sickness. And then there's a 2/3 pay up to $200 a day for taking care of others. And so to do that math, sometimes it's easier to even track those different types of leave in different buckets.
Okay, so let's go over that one more time, Nichole. So you've got two different types of leave. And I want to know the first one for FCRA. One is if the employee is sick themselves, correct?
Yes,
and then the
or things they might be sick. Yeah.
Okay.
So I like to think of it as any time that it relates to your own sickness or you think you might be sick or you're told you might be sick, it's a you issue. That is up to $511 a day full pay for up to 80 hours total. And so that's what you can get reimbursed. You can also get health insurance costs on top of that. So that I think is an important note as well, that the health care is going to be above and beyond that. And then for taking care of others, this includes the up to 80 hours for I'm taking care of somebody else who's sick, or I'm taking care of my kids, or somebody who has, there are a couple of different reasons, but all of it involves taking care of other people. And if you're taking care of other people, regardless of whether it's the 80 hours or the extended FMLA for up to 10 additional weeks on top of the 80 hours, that is at 2/3 pay up to $200 a day. And the employee gets to choose what they want to take first. So if they have a bucket of leave that you provided to them, and they also have the FCRA leave, they get to decide what's most beneficial for them to take.
And how do you document that? I guess in terms of, this goes back to documentation and documenting that the employee is sick. What type of documentation are you looking for your records there? And then I'm assuming just a good email trail with you and the employee as to what their choice is for either running down their sick leave or PTO and then moving over to the FCRA pay, or what would be good practice there?
I think it goes back to exactly what Lindsay was mentioning earlier, which is you should have a request form that's specific to the FCRA leave, so that they are certifying that they qualify for the FCRA. And then for other types of leave, you would just go through your normal leave approval process. And if that's emails, then yes, definitely keep the emails.
Okay, we've got a couple quick questions. Can a full-time employee use the FCRA part-time or also work part-time, or is it all or nothing? So you talked about these up to 80 hours for both. Could we take those 80 hours over 4 weeks? Or is it got to use those 80 hours all in one slug?
It can depend on whether employees are teleworking, and Lindsay can expand on this as well. But assuming that your people are essential and they can't telework because we're in the essential employee realm, it really depends. They're going to generally have to take at least full day absences. And then, in many cases, they're not going to be cleared to come back. If they think they've been taking care of somebody that has COVID and they're not just at home with their kids, they may have to take a good chunk of it. But generally speaking, it won't be possible to take intermittent leave unless they're taking care of a child because they're essential employees and have to work on site. Did I capture that fully, Lindsay?
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. I'm assuming the person that's asking this question is probably referring to the FMLA part of the FCRA leave, which they can use that intermittently. But I don't really see in the other circumstances, if you were taking care of yourself or if you had COVID, I don't think you would be doing that. I think you would be using it all at once.
Right.
Yeah. And Department of Labor has issued guidance on that specifically says that if folks can't telework and they're gone for their own illness or to take care of somebody else that's ill, intermittent leave is not going to be possible. But if they're taking care of kids, maybe. Both parties, by the way, have to agree to it. So if an employer says no, you can require them basically to take it in lump sum.
Right.
So another question for you guys, how do you handle an employee with underlying conditions that is presently taking PTO but has run out of PTO? Are they able to go on FMLA, and can we get a task credit for this? What kind of documentation do we need to provide?
So if the person is already on, if they're already on PTO and they've run out of PTO, okay, so if they qualified for the paid sick leave with their 6 different qualifying reasons, and the first 3, have to do with that person actually having COVID or being advised to self-quarantine, then yes, they could use this leave. But if they don't have qualifying reasons 1 through 3, then if you let them use this leave, you wouldn't be getting the tax credit for that. So, and then again, if they're using it to care for someone else or, caring for their child, then yes, they'd be able to use the leave. But if they're, just using it for this, they can't just use it for the sake of using it. It's for the specific qualifying reasons that are listed, that have been provided.
And it's really important, this is Nichole, it's really important to note that the extended FMLA is only for care of a child.
Mm-hmm.
It's for no other reason. So an employee might qualify for FMLA because they're taking care of a family member with a serious health condition, and they would qualify under FMLA, just regular FMLA, assuming you qualify under normal, regular 50 employees within a 75-mile radius FMLA, or your local equivalent. They might be eligible to take the leave, but it won't be paid leave, and you're not going to get a tax credit for it. It's just regular FMLA. The only tax credit FMLA that's available is to take care of kids.
Okay. And, you know, I should take a step back, and can one of you please give us the quick definition of FCRA, and just so everybody's on the same page,
Yes,
what it is.
it's the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA. We're saying FCRA because I can't say FFCRA anymore, and I
I
can't
know.
remember that.
So for everybody,
Right.
FFCRA, FCRA, because, you know, it's not a government thing unless it has an acronym, apparently. I'm sorry, Lindsay, tell us what it is.
Oh, tell us what.
One more time, family, just in
It's
case
the
people.
Families First
Families-
Coronavirus Response Act, and that encompasses the paid leave, the emergency sick pay, and the emergency FMLA.
Okay. So I think that we've answered several of the questions with regards to that, FCRA versus FMLA or FEMLA, which is also what Nichole was referencing. I want to go back. Do either of you have anything else on that? Because I want to go back. I've got a couple other questions that I want to make sure that these people get answered as well, but they're not exactly with regards to that.
I do. Oh,
So go ahead, Lindsay.
I do have another point. I've had some clients ask me if their employees are eligible to use PTO for the time that they're not being paid if they're taking the emergency FMLA. So the emergency FMLA, again, is used to care for your child, and we're only required to provide you up to 2/3 of your pay, up to $200 a day. So I've had some employers ask, can my employees use their PTO to supplement so that they're getting a whole pay? You are not required to allow them to do that. If you do that, again, you need to keep really clear tracking records, because you may overpay them if you let them record too much PTO, and then they also get the paid FMLA. So it's more of a tracking hassle for you to allow it. But I do know that some employers are doing that, but you won't get reimbursed for that additional PTO that you're allowing that person to use during that time. You're only getting reimbursed for the emergency paid FMLA or sick leave.
Okay.
Yeah, right now it's kind of like fitting puzzle pieces together with respect to pay, right? Because then you've got companies that have received the paycheck protection loans on top of that, and that guidance says that you can pay people, but if they're eligible for the FIC relief, you have to use that FIC relief and get paid under Social Security for that first, and then all the rest of it you can use for PPP. So right now you really have to look at everything that's available, figure out what your situation is for paid leave, and then figure out how you're going to recoup some of that money.
What if you're an employer of less than 500 employees? Can you refuse to provide FCRA?
I would not advise that. You should be providing it. There are some exemptions for employers under 50, but even those, and Nichole, you may know more about this, what I had seen last on that, it was very vague about, what the qualifications for being under 50 and not having to provide it, and what you would have to prove to show that you wouldn't be able to, keep your business viable at the time. But if you're, especially if you're between 50 and 500, you are required to provide this leave. And I don't know about the fines if you get caught and you don't. I haven't heard about that.
Okay. I think that answers that question. I want to go back and make sure that we answer a couple more questions. For those who are participating, please send in your questions. We've got about 15 more minutes before we'll get you back on your day. Please send them in. And then I also want to make sure that we talk about engagement with our essential employees and how we can kind of keep them, and what some good practices are. But first, let me just answer, how do you keep your employee's name if they tested positive or you had some comment? They might be able to figure that out based on who's billing, who's not, what their absence is. I mean, that goes back into the privacy that we talked about before, Nichole. Is there anything specific or any good practices in terms of not making sure that we don't mention employees' names? Actually,
Yeah,
already,
I mean, again, it goes back to,
go ahead.
can you hear me okay, Stephanie?
We can now, yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, guys. Good old technology. So it's really just a matter of trying to keep it as confidential as you possibly can, right? So if a client is saying, you have to tell me, you may have to push back a little bit and say, you know, I need to know exactly what you're going to do with this information at very least, but in any case, I might not be able to provide the name or identity. I can tell you a work location, something like that. And like we said earlier, it may be obvious. It's somebody on, it's a small office, it's somebody on the second floor, and that person happens to be the one that's out sick, you know, but it's still our obligation to try to keep it confidential if we can.
And what is your obligation in terms of telling everyone who's on that second floor that they were potentially, you know, potentially exposed to it? If you're in a small office and you have been trying to practice social distancing and you've got somebody who tests positive, does everyone have to stay home for 14 days? How does that work?
It's going to depend on your specific office situation, but generally speaking, it may not be a you have to stay at home for 14 days, but it might be identifying those people that were most probably in contact with it. I do know several offices that have shut down for 7 days, the period of time they think it's most probable for symptoms to present. And in other cases, they haven't shut down at all because they felt like their social distancing guidelines protected them. They went and cleaned the office and everybody came back the next day. Again, it's going to be a little bit of a case by case. Lindsay, I don't know if you have more to add there.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the same thing. I think it's case by case, and I definitely think, again, transparency is best. So you wouldn't want them, you know, you wouldn't want any employees to come back later and say, you know, you didn't tell me, or now I have it, and someone else here had it, and you didn't share that with us. You know, you definitely want to be open with the employees if you have an employee that tests positive for it.
So let's kind of pivot a little bit and talk about engaging these folks. These are folks that are coming in, you know, are worried about their own health and safety. You might be working right beside them, or you could be working at the home office or, you know, at your own house while they're sitting in a skiff or at a grocery store or, you know, wherever that may be. Any tips or suggestions on keeping them engaged? How much communication do we need? Is there such thing as too much communication? How much transparency do you think is best practice? Like, what are we seeing employers do in terms of these folks?
I would say, you know, some of the employers are providing hazard pay, which is great if you're able to do that. You know, be flexible, listen to your employees and find out what their concerns are and what they need. If you have a small staff and you are able to locate, you know, some face masks and it makes people more comfortable to wear face masks, or you provide everyone with, you know, hand sanitizer, you know, do what you can to be employee, you know, favor the employees. And you know, I think during a time like this, I don't really think there's too much communication. I feel like things change so frequently. So staying in touch with your employees, whether that is through, you know, video, I mean, we're all using different video technologies, Zoom and Skype and all different kinds of things to check in, and having virtual happy hours, or, you know, whatever it may be, just to check in with your employees on a regular basis. And I don't think you can do it too much.
Nichole, have you heard anything that your clients are doing specifically to engage with this specific aspect of the workforce?
Sure, I think a fair dose of honesty is sometimes warranted in situations like this. So we've sent some frustration on the part of employees at, you know, why certain actions aren't being taken, or certain employees think that they can do their entire job from home and you don't think that's true, or your client has told you that's not true, or the prime contractor has told you that's not true. So there can be differences of an opinion over, what the job responsibilities are, how much you can be doing, whether a job is work from home or not. And sometimes you just have to level with the person and say, I would love to be able to limit your job duties to XYZ so that you could only do them from home, but I can't do that, and this is why I can't do that. Or I sincerely appreciate that, you live in a house with your parents and your parents are over the age of 65, but can you appreciate that if I don't have people coming to work every day, none of us are going to have jobs, period. None of us are going to have anything to come back to. And so if you have ideas on how I can better navigate that, I'm open to suggestions, but everybody has a different vantage point in this situation, and stopping for a moment before you just say, no, that's ridiculous, or no, you're being ridiculous, I think is important, because sometimes we've unpacked those situations and we've found that there are Americans with Disabilities Act issues involved, or there is a legal component involved. And if we hadn't stopped to ask the question, it could have really led to a bigger legal problem down the road.
Yep.
What would you say if an employee, has not been deemed essential by the guidelines, but the employers are still requiring them to come into the office? First off, legal, and then any suggestions around communication. I think that kind of goes to what you were just saying.
I think I missed the first part of your question, Stephanie. Can you repeat that?
And specifically, the question is, if an employer has not told someone they are essential, but is requiring them to come into their job, what, if anything, this is written from behalf of the employee, but what can an employer, if you're not essential, can you still make people come in?
With all of the, before all of the orders, or if you're in a state or locality that doesn't have a stay-at-home order, then yeah, you could still make people come in most situations. But most places, particularly on the Eastern Seaboard or on the coast, have those stay-at-home orders, which would limit either the employee or the employer from having non-essential folks come into the office. But certainly, I have family in places that have much fewer restrictions than where we live. And so that's definitely a possibility.
Okay, another question for you. Once the stay-at-home orders are lifted, what if you have employees who are at greater risk? For example, a compromised immune system. Would they be entitled to request an accommodation under the ADA? And I know it's forward thinking, and I appreciate someone's positivity that this will be lifted soon. And we're already questioning what our that will be 14 more webinars from now.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because currently, everyone's thinking on this is that the flu itself, COVID itself, is not necessarily a disability, right? But you could have underlying conditions which are a disability, and being exposed to risk of COVID is thought to be something that needs to be accommodated, or you should go through the accommodation process under the ADA. So people are coming back to work and may ask for accommodations. It's going to be more difficult, I think, to argue that they can't be accommodated at all, given particularly if in fact they had been working from home for the last 2 months, right? But there might be situations where you've let certain essential functions go for a period of time and now you need them to be done. So again, I would encourage employers to look at whether there is an ADA issue, some underlying condition that precipitates the need to do an ADA accommodation assessment, and then go through your normal ADA accommodation assessment practice, which involves the documentation and really evaluating whether the essential functions of the job can be performed with or without the accommodation.
Lindsay, did you have anything to add? Or
no, I was like, that's perfect. What Nichole said.
What she said. All right, I've got for anybody on the webinar, please get those last minute questions in. We've only got 5 more minutes, and I'm going to ask both of these lovely people to leave us with their parting thoughts. I do have one question that I apologize to the person who asked it. They asked at 1:15, and I have not been able to fit it back in. but I think I have the answer to this. Would showing a government badge be sufficient enough if one of my employees got pulled over, or is the letter stated earlier the recommended route? My thoughts personally are you want the letter.
Yeah.
So just
Yeah.
The more documentation, the better. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that we answered that person.
Yeah, the badge itself doesn't tell them anything, right? The badge itself could be non-essential or essential.
Exactly. Good point.
Right.
No, as far as I know, no badge says essential or no non-essential.
Right.
So as we have our last couple minutes here, and I want to make sure that we're mindful of our time, if you guys can give us kind of some of we know you're fielding questions left and right from a million different places and people and different concerns. Give us your best in terms of wrap up with regards to essential employees, whether that be best practices, gotchas, make sure you look at this, don't do this, please don't do this. What do you guys have for us in terms of wrap up?
Specifically, I just wanted to mention something about unemployment because I have been getting a lot of questions about unemployment. Employees that you've either reduced their hours or temporarily furloughed them or permanently furloughed them, they're all eligible for unemployment. There are a lot of different new unemployment like leaves or underneath of the CARES Act. You'll see different, the pandemic emergency, the pandemic unemployment assistance, the federal pandemic unemployment insurance compensation. The biggest thing is just remember to, send the employee to the state website in which they work. Some of the states, specifically with Georgia, I found you have to submit the unemployment claim for the employee prior to the employee going and requesting unemployment. I haven't seen that with any of the other states, but just heads up in case you have anyone in Georgia, you are required to submit a piece on them first before the employee does their own thing. And the unemployment out there is available too. I just like to point out for people that you've reduced the hours or reduced their hours and compensation, which is very new. That that's not typical under our normal unemployment rules. So just those are just some things to be mindful of too.
What does that do to me as an employer, our unemployment rate going forward? Well, is it going to impact our rates?
No, these new forms of unemployment insurance should not be impacting your rates. These were enacted obviously because of this whole situation. So these specifically the additional, the $600 additional and the different types of unemployment. There's also unemployment for 1099s that's out there. These will not, these do not impact your rates as an employer.
Okay. Nichole, what do you have for us?
I think the big takeaway I would ask employers to sit with is try not to be knee-jerk and so reactionary. I think we're so focused sometimes on keeping our businesses going and afloat. We're triaging to stay alive on the business front. That sometimes we need to slow down a little bit and think about individual situations. It's just too tempting to create a rule because it's easier to follow a rule, right? And sometimes we just slow down and say, okay, does the rule apply in this situation? And pause for a minute. And then generally, I think the answer comes, and if it doesn't, then contact an advisor to help you walk through it.
Yep.
Great advice. Go ahead, Lindsay.
I read a great article this morning that said some of the things that we can do as leaders. I mean, it's very hard for us when we're normally used to controlling everything, and now we really can't. Is to, as hard as it is, embrace the uncertainty and really be transparent, engaging, focus, provide some focus, and be patient with your employees. So those would be my ending thoughts.
And I think for me personally, I think I echo the sentiment of transparency, and I am a huge person where I just believe act with kindness and grace, right? How would you want to be treated? There's a right and a wrong way, and there's a lot of gray out there, and you may not like the actions that you have to take as an employer. Nobody likes this. Nobody's having fun. But act with kindness and grace, and that will be remembered. Any other final things? And we'll let everyone get their day back. It's 2 o'clock.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
As fun as this stuff can be.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you all for your attention and your support for our webinar. Please feel free if you have any questions. You have our email addresses. You've been staring at our mugs for an hour now while you were multitasking, I'm sure. Feel free to reach out to us via email or on LinkedIn. We're happy to support you however you need. So thank you all for your participation.